tide of cheap, potent gin washed over the slums of 18th century London, leaving a society steeped in an unnerving toil. In the labyrinthine alleyways and squalid tenements, a new kind of desolation took root. The air, thick with coal smoke and damp, now carried the sweet, cloying scent of juniper. It was the era of the Gin Craze, a period defined not by overt panic, but by a slow creeping decay that hollowed out the city from within. The addiction was widespread, an epidemic of the spirit that manifested in a pervasive, disquieting stillness. Faces, pale and gaunt under the perpetual gray sky, stared out from doorways with glassy, unfocused eyes. It was a social horror observed in the aggregate, in the quiet corrosion of a populace. The individual was lost, absorbed into the sprawling, anonymous misery of a city drinking itself into oblivion. The color palette of this world was muted, a relentless spectrum of gray and brown, from the grimy brick of the buildings to the threadbare clothes on the backs of their inhabitants. In this landscape of neglect, the pursuit of gin became the singular, driving force, eclipsing all other aspects of life. The consequences of this mass intoxication rippled outward, breeding a culture of casual violence and profound neglect. With gin cheaper than beer, it became the sustenance of the desperate. Mothers, their senses dulled by the spirit, were seen pacifying their crying infants with gin-soaked rags, a gesture that was both a mercy and a poison. Children, left to fend for themselves on the filthy streets, learned theft as their first trade. The social contract frayed and then dissolved. Robbery became commonplace, not as an act of calculated malice, but as a necessary, instinctual step towards acquiring the next drink. The crowded lanes, once merely impoverished, turned predatory. Every shadow held the potential for a swift, brutal mugging. Domestic life disintegrated into a backdrop for drunken rages and thoughtless cruelty. The city's morgues filled with the bodies of those who had succumbed to alcohol poisoning, frozen to death in a stupor, or fallen victim to the sudden, explosive violence that punctuated the calm. It was a cycle of despair, where the misery of existence drove people to drink, and the drink only deepened the squalor and violence of their lives. The rising tide of crime and social collapse could not be ignored forever. The city's elite, initially indifferent to the plight of the poor, began to see the chaos seep beyond the slums. The workforce was becoming unreliable, the streets unsafe. A moral panic, fueled by lurid pamphlets and sermons, began to grip the upper echelons of society. The government, once a beneficiary of the taxes on spirits, was forced to act. A series of legislative measures, known as the Gin Acts, were passed between 1729 and 1751 in a desperate attempt to staunch the flow of cheap gin. The initial acts were clumsy and largely ineffective, leading to riots and a thriving black market. But the state was persistent. Taxes were raised dramatically, and licensing laws were made impossibly strict. The goal was to make gin a luxury, to price it out of the hands of the impoverished mass. Slowly, painstakingly, the government began to assert its control, strangling the supply of the spirit that had so thoroughly saturated the city's underbelly. The gin shops, once ubiquitous, began to vanish from the street corners. The grip of the craze loosened, not with a sudden snap, but with a gradual, almost imperceptible release. The heavy hand of government regulation, combined with rising grain prices, finally made the cheap solace of gin unattainable for the majority. The city began to stir from its drunken slumber. The streets, while still poor and crowded, saw a marginal decline in the ambient threat of violence and theft. The glassy-eyed stares were replaced, slowly, by a more lucid, if weary, awareness. The era of rampant, public intoxication receded, leaving behind a scarred social landscape and a cautionary tale of addiction and control. It was not a story of individual redemption, but of a societal fever breaking. The cold observational lens reveals a population subdued, a problem managed not through compassion, but through the brute force of economic and legal restriction. The gray-brown palette of the city remained, but the acute phase of its self-destruction had passed, leaving behind a quiet, lingering exhaustion.